Well, today is Palm Sunday, and I've been called to do something a little bit different today. I do have notes, but today there's no script. So, I'm trusting God that He'll provide what we need today for food in the form of His Word. I'm trying to follow the lectionary today, so we're following the passages of Palm Sunday, and I've chosen red. So part of this is to help us remember that we're connected to a larger body around the world. There's a church that celebrates this whole day, and we celebrate this as one. But another reason for just doing the notes is I actually have a confession. In the midst of trying to work on the sermon, I got distracted, and I watched this movie. It's called Dodgeball. A True Underdog Story is the subtitle for it. And I had this expectation. It came out in 2004. I had this expectation that it was really funny, and I had forgotten a bunch of the details, but I needed something to a little bit of joy, if you will, and so I started watching this movie, and it's about these guys. They own this gym, but they're just a bunch of average Joes, and they're having to defend. They're basically going bankrupt, and they're having to defend themselves against this richer bank or gym. And so that's the basic premise of the movie. But what I found in watching it is that the whole premise of it is that it's salacious is the best word for it. They're telling these jokes, and there's a subtext underneath it that says, "Oh, this is okay if you do this. This is how life should be." But there's this sexual undertone in everything in the entire movie, and it actually disturbed me that I at one time thought that this was funny. But so we all have these expectations of whether they're good expectations or bad expectations, and today the people of the time when Jesus was here, they had expectations for what they had expectations for the kingdom. They had expectations that their culture was the one that was going to be most prominent. My culture is the one that's going to become the kingdom. We also have these expectations of timing, and especially nowadays, it's got to be right now. But even back then, they had expectations of Jesus. What is he going to do this week? This week, he's riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. What's he going to do? The big idea I want you to get out of this message today is that our expectations of the short term distract us from the hope of the long term. And so, to use the passages of his triumphal entry, they all basically tell the same general storyline. Jesus, there's a crowd, and Jesus rides in on a donkey into Jerusalem. And that's the basic premise of the story. However, there's some little details that each of them have. They're all unique in their own way of saying things. But today, as part of following this lectionary, I chose John 12, verses 12 to 16. The next day, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, crying out, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. even the King of Israel. And Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, just as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. So to go through and we're going to try and look at each verse here. All the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they also reference this line from Psalm 118, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so they all have this unique element to it, and it's part of why we read that earlier. But starting back at verse 12, it says the next day. That is referencing actually back to John 12:1, and so there's that in 12:1 it says is 6 days before Passover, and so this is the next day according to John. So therefore this is 5 days before Passover. Now, as I'm doing my research for this, I found that there was some scholars that are fairly well known, and they're doing this. They're kind of battling back and forth between them. T.W. Manson, he said that this couldn't be Passover time because number one, palm branches are used in the feast of the temples, or the tabernacles rather. Feast of the Tabernacles, and so this couldn't be Passover then. This was 6 months earlier. But then D.A. Carson says, 2 centuries earlier, palm branches had already become a national, not to say nationalist, symbol. So they were not only used for this Feast of Tabernacles, but culture had shifted it so that it's become more used throughout. But T.W. Manson says, there was also no figs growing at that time. But then D.A. Carson counters this, and he says, his view rests largely on this observation that figs do not usually appear on the trees around Jerusalem till June and September, which seems to rule out a Passover, usually April, as the right period for verses, and this is from Matthew rather, Matthew 21, 18 to 21. But figs are regularly found in Jericho much earlier, and sometimes also in Jerusalem. And so Manson's view introduces some difficult problems in the Passion chronology. And so there's this battling back and forth of people who should know, what the Bible is saying. But we need to remember where we come from spiritually, and who those voices in the crowd are around us. And this kind of speaks to verse 16 from John right there. We don't understand these things at first, but if we go back and remember, right? So I want to lay out the scene for you here on Palm Sunday when Jesus is riding into town there. There's the crowd that's there. They're filled with not only the disciples, they have this expectation that Jesus is their teacher and will continue to do so. There's the people from Bethany who witnessed Lazarus' resurrection, and they want to see more miracles of this, right? And then there's the Pharisees who have their own following and their own expectations of legalism, and this Jesus is going to disrupt all that. Now they're on this road basically that goes from Jericho all the way up to Jerusalem, climbs about 3,000 meters, because Jericho is like one of the lowest points in all the world, and you're climbing up this mountain, Mount of Olives. And so you can kind of imagine the scene. It's a fairly narrow roadway, but these people bring the palm branches, whether they were already growing there. I mean, 2,000 years ago, the climate could have changed. And you think of Vegas, there was palm branches there, and there's no chance of palm branches being brought there on their own. But here, if we imagine, you know, there's palm branches definitely in Jericho, and so maybe they brought them with them. Anyways, this is just sort of to get you a sense of what it was like there. Now they're on their way to Jerusalem, which is also known here as the daughter of Zion. Zion you can think of as sort of this idealized image, this expectation of Jerusalem, this idealized spiritual wholeness, place of peace. And but what they're doing is they're casting their hopes on the land. And we kind of have done this many times in the past. We do this with Rome. We do this with America. Maybe Toronto. But what's I think actually happening here is I want to make a note here about John. In the other Gospels there, they mention about the cloaks. Now the cloaks, they're laying them down on the road, they're putting them on the donkey. These cloaks actually, they're the people's last possession. This comes from Exodus 22, verses 26 to 27. And basically, if you have to ask for a loan and you give out your cloak, basically your last possession, you're saying, okay, this is the only thing I have to give. But you're supposed to, as per that verse, have it given back to you. So it's very, very precious. And here they're laying it down on the road and saying, okay, we want you to become our king. And so it becomes part of Israelite culture there in 2 Kings 9:13. And that's for King Jehu. But for John, he says, well, we're already talking about a king coming, with the coming of the Jesus sitting on a donkey. That basically already is satisfied from Zechariah 9:9 is where that passage comes from. Behold, your king is coming on a donkey's colt. So John doesn't include this thing about cloaks. So he's saying that for him, the palm branches are unique. The other ones, they might mention branches from a tree or some leaves or something like that. But Paul specifically says palms. So I was like, well, why are you talking about this? You're coming in on a donkey, which is about humility and peace. But what is this about palms that you're getting at here? And I think it comes, what he's referencing is actually coming from Solomon's temple. So that's from 1 Kings 6 and 7. The palm leaves were actually decorated on the interior of the temple. And so when you go into the temple, you're surrounded by these palm leaves and other decorations. And then Ezekiel brings this up again in Ezekiel 40 and 41. And so he has this vision of the new temple, and the palm branches are surrounding them once again. But when the Israelites were exiled and then they came back, they rebuilt the temple, but it didn't look like the one that Ezekiel had envisioned. And so some of the elders, they were weeping. And then Herod comes along around the time of Jesus, and he builds this, masterpiece. It's amazing, but it was all about Herod. It doesn't. I mean, we don't really have any references, maybe from Maccabees or something, but but they don't have that same sense of presence of what is this new temple that we're supposed to see. And I think what John is trying to get at is that Jesus is this new temple, right? So what can we do with this information? Well, we need to keep sharing the whole truth, especially with those who are in our crowd. We have all these voices around us trying to tell us what we should believe, but we need to examine what that whole truth is. In our surrounding culture, it's very relativistic, and so you have a generation now that doesn't know the standard, doesn't know God's word, and doesn't know what truth is. And so they go to social media. What is social media telling me today? And then so social media says, well, you have to believe this, and so you do this thing they call virtue signaling. It's like, oh, I like that idea, and so you grab onto that identity, and then it changes next week, so you grab onto that identity. But it's gotten to the point where they're now calling it cancel culture. You're moving truth to it's so fragmented that it doesn't mean anything anymore. The sad thing is that it's creeping into our church. And there's some of the words that they use is like woke. If you're woke, then you're aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, such especially regarding race and social justice. Now, don't get me wrong; these things are important. I could not tell you how to live life as a black woman or a Native American. I can't do that. I can only live who I am. But to actually cancel out who you are, and knowing that you have flaws, yes, acknowledge them, good, confess them before a holy and loving God, and He will forgive you. The other thing is that if we keep trying to actively and pursue these identities in social media or whatever, it's works-based, right? We're doing it because it shows, here I am, I'm doing this good work, but it doesn't change who God created you inside. And yet it's becoming a part of culture, and the church is going with it. And it reminded me in my devotions this past week, as I was reading Judges 20, verse 11. So the Israelites, it's like the most horrific chapter in Judges. All of Israelites came together, and they were going up against Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. And Benjamin, if you go back to the original in the Torah, Benjamin was the most beloved of Israel's sons. And yet here he had done this awful thing. And so it says in verse 11, they were completely united, the Israelites, and gathered together to attack. It's funny, the same thing is happening right now. We gather together. We think we're united in our thoughts and our expectations, but we get lost. We get distracted. We have to share this whole truth because Jesus is our only hope. He is coming, and even maybe on a cloud of witnesses. The other unique part about John's verse is that is this fear not. The other verses, they say rejoice. Rejoice, because that's what it says in Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. But John is focusing here on fear not. And I think the reason for that is that if we don't fear, we cannot be controlled by the expectations of others. If we don't fear, then we know who our power comes from. And that is the reason why we rejoice. So underneath this rejoice is this fear not. And John wants to bring that out and say, listen, I am coming, fear not. Because that's what Jesus said to the disciples when he rose from the dead. That's the first thing he said. He said, peace, fear not. The church is Jesus' hope. And so 1 Thessalonians 2:19. For what... Oh, I lost my place. For what is our hope, or joy, or crown of boasting before our Lord Jesus at his coming? Is it not you? And I think another good example of this, of not fearing, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a member of the church in Germany, but he was also known to go to New York, and he went to Rome. And that's where, when he went to Rome, that's where he had his first vision of what the church united would look like, right? Every tribe, nation, and tongue gathering together. And this is like he's in Rome. This is St. Paul's Cathedral, right? This is the Catholic Church, but he has this vision. He's a Protestant, and he understands this is part of what it should look like. Bonhoeffer died on April 9th, 1945, which is 2 days after Easter. He died a martyr's death because he died for this vision of the church in unity. And it's interesting, John is also considered to be the author of Revelation. And this vision for what the church is mentioned here. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. These are the only two places in all of the New Testament that mentions the palm branches. Jesus is our temple. He is the cornerstone, and he's building us up brick by brick, each one of us, to be part of that temple.